Be here this morning with Dr. Howard Bosson, who is Professor Emeritus of Photography and Visual Communication from the School of Journalism at Michigan State University. Dr. Bosson taught at MSU for 43 years before retiring this past May and moving here to Houston. He has curated many photography exhibitions at Michigan State University's museums and at the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh. He has written several books on photography, including Luke Swank, Modernist Photographer, and Henry Holmes Smith, Man of Light. Among his numerous articles are three he co-authored with Reverend Colin Bosson, who is our senior minister. Their most recent is Life Played Out in Images, the self-portraiture of Lyubusha Yartso-Yakova. And so now I again welcome you to the Arts Forum here at First Universalist Unitarian Church, Unitarian Universalist Church. And my name is Dr. Jolie Rock. I'm the Director of Music. So Dr. Bosson, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great.
Great. When did you meet Lyubusha Yartso-Yakova, and when did you first see her Tea Club photographs?
Well, for many decades, I used to do a study abroad photography program in Europe. And around 2000, 2001, we started taking the students to Prague as part of the program. And that was because we were a lecturer of longtime Markéta Leskečová, another Czech photographer who had been living in exile in London, suggested that maybe it would be a good idea to come to Prague rather than just bring her to London to talk to the students and open up the whole world of Czech photography. So we did that, and Lyubusha at that time was the head of the Department of Photography at one of the graphic arts schools in Prague, and that's how we met her. I got to be closer. Okay. All right. That's better. All right. So, is that working now?
Yes.
Okay. So, she talked to our students that first year and every year, but she never showed the Tea Club photos. Matter of fact, she was probably the most reticent speaker I had ever had in the program. Very kind of protective of her work, and obviously uncomfortable talking about the type of photography she does, which is very personal documentary photography. So it was probably, I don't know, about 5 or 6 years after we started going there that she started inviting us over for dinner. And yet we still didn't see the Tea Club photographs. We did not know that she was gay. We did not know that she had a partner who she had been living with at that time for several years, or many years. And it was only several years later that she really began to open up to us and talk about her life, her authentic life, I guess you would say, and began to share these photographs with us.
Great.
So it was about 2015, I think, before we actually saw this body of work.
There's so many places that we can go with this, so based on what you've already said. So first you said that there was another Czech artist that suggested that you go to Poland to see her work and to actually speak with her. Who was that, and how does she fit into the overall oeuvre of Czech photography?
Okay, so the artist I was referring to was Markéta Leskečová, and suggested we go to Prague, not Poland.
Oh, sorry.
But, yeah, it's okay. And I first met Markéta in the very early 1980s when I started doing a study abroad program. Matter of fact, I guess the year I met Markéta was the year Lyubusha started this Tea Club project. But Marketa was living in London at the time, having left, like many people left Czechoslovakia and other Eastern European countries for a more free existence. And Marketa has become one of the most important social documentary photographers of Czech photography. And I think that this is a good spot to maybe draw a distinction between personal documentary photography and social documentary photography. Most of the photographers who explored documentary photography in the era that we're talking about photographed people and places as sort of outside observers. Some of them got to know people quite well, like Marketa, who kind of, sometimes you might think of her as photographing from sort of the inside because she got to know her subjects so well. But for the most part, she would photograph a community sort of from the outside. Le Boucher, by contrast, had no real interest in photographing, making those kinds of photographs. She wanted to photograph her life, and it became a very, very personal exploration. So when she began her first photographs in the factory where she worked, that Reverend Collin referred to in his sermon, she did not photograph work. She photographed the workers, but not the workers working. She photographed the workers as their authentic selves, having worked on the night shift in a post office in the 1970s. I can tell you that the photographs of the guy in the back on our explanation board of him lying on top of the printed paper, it was a pretty authentic kind of experience in terms of what workers did in defiance of the folks that they had to answer to, and sometimes made their lives very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. When she photographed the Vietnamese community, she had become a Czech as a second language teacher and pretty much lived with that community. Similar, very intense involvement with the Romani community. But I think it's not until she gets to the Tea Club that we really do see her full self as a human being trying to live life as a gay individual in a repressive society.
And so with that, how would you say you framed Yartsev-Yakova's work as that of a dissident?
So when you look at her work as well as work of other Czech photographers, I think you need to look at them in relationship to the regime, in relationship to what the regime found acceptable, and the kinds of commentary that they were making. Photographers who photographed things that the regime did not particularly like paid a price in a variety of ways. So two other photographers of this period, both of whom are social documentary photographers, and both of whom I know, ran afoul of the regime. One, Gingrich Stripe, who is well known for photographing village life in Czechoslovakia, was arrested and detained for many months because they did not like his photographs. And when he got out, he was not allowed to pursue his career for some time. Marketa Laskechua, who I referenced, her photographs of pilgrims was made at a time when you were in, being a pilgrim was frowned upon, and making photographs of pilgrims was more frowned upon. So it's in that kind of context, I think, or that kind of atmosphere, that Labouche is doing this work. And I think it's one of the reasons that she didn't show it for a long time, because there's both potentially a personal price for her, and in regard to the nature of the subject matter, potential price for her subjects that she did not, she was uncomfortable with putting out there. I mean, to make this work really required trust. And to make the work and then showing it publicly at that time would have been, I think, a violation of the trust of the people she was photographing.
So she began making the work in the 80s. When did she begin to show the work?
She showed some work, not this work. She showed some work in the 80s, had a little bit of, a couple of exhibitions. But for the most part, she did not show very actively until just about 6 or 7 years ago.
Oh, wow.
The breakthrough for her is one of these interesting stories of becoming an overnight success after having labored in total obscurity or near total obscurity for most of one's life. In 2015, she began going back through her life's work. She began to work with this young Czech curator who helped her put together the book, The Black Years, which is an absolutely remarkable book of about 300 photographs and excerpts from her diaries that we read this morning. And that book was brought to the attention in 2017, I think it was, or maybe 2018, to the director of the photography festival in Arles in France, one of the biggest photography festivals in the world. And he was so taken with the work, he offered her a one-person exhibition in what those of us who attend Arles think of as the premier spot in the big church in the center of the square in Arles. And out of that offer came not just the exhibition, but the book Evocative that she also put together with this young Czech curator. And that book was shortlisted in the Aperture Paris Photo Book Awards for the best photography book of 2019. It's a story of sort of on Tuesday, nobody knows who you are. On Wednesday, your exhibition opens. And on Thursday, the New York Times has noticed you, the Times of London has noticed you, Le Monde has noticed you, etc. I mean, the show just, after it opened, just sort of exploded her reputation on the international scene.
Well, Reverend Collins' sermon earlier he mentioned the question, who am I? And I'm sure that during her entire life, she questioned, who am I, which speaks to some of her photography, well, all of her photography, actually. And so how does seeing Labouche's work resonate with you or inspire you to reflect on who you are?
Um, wow. Leboucher's work is, I think, some of the most rawest, most authentic um, photography. It makes me ask questions of what does it mean to be authentic? What does it mean to be true to myself? Um, would I have the courage to live my life the way she lived her life? I'm not sure that I have. Um, uh, it makes me think about both life in terms of lived life that way, but also life in terms of reflecting upon how I think about art and how I think about um, what this work represents in terms of the world of photography and art, and how she has shown us how to look at life in a very different way than other photographers have shown us how to look at life. That may be talking around the bush a little bit, but
No, that's
Yeah,
okay. I agree. I think that for me, looking at her work has helped me to see community differently and in a different way than what people typically write about or demonstrate artistically in stories that we think we want to hear, and these are not necessarily stories that we think we want to hear, but now we're seeing them and it's like, wow, we're drawn in, and I think that that's really poignant, and probably one of the reasons why her work is so important. Can you give me some other reasons why her work is important within the photography realm?
so as I said, her work is very different than the work of other photographers, social documentary photographers or documentary photographers. And I'm going to go sort of back a little in terms of sort of the history. Reverend Collin mentioned that when she got into school finally, people did not respond to her work because she wasn't doing what was expected of her. The school that she went to was probably the best or one of the best places to study photography at that time. And it very much championed the work of the social documentary movement that was beginning to grow up there. So work like Markéta Leschetschua or Yindir Streitz or Josef Kudelka, people who really looked at the world in terms of capturing moments of things that were unfolding kind of at events, following narrative kinds of threads or lines. And Leboucher didn't do any of that. If you look at the work of the people I was talking about, their notions of composition are very classical. They all are pretty much fall within the category of what has become known as the decisive moment in social documentary photography, a term that the French photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson sort of brought to the art world. And when you look at her work, they're just a mess. I mean, they're a total mess. The frames are a mess. They don't conform to our notion of what a beautifully seen moment should look like. And that, in fact, is probably one of the main reasons why her work is important. Her work breaks with the tradition of the way traditional social documentary or documentary photographers look at the frame, look at the subject, and she presents a much, much different kind of moment. Things are askew, things are off balance, things that other photographers would just literally chuck out the door because they're a technical mistake. She elevates as part of her aesthetic. So, as you go along that wall, there are several photographs where you see this strange black bar that cuts across the top or the side or through the middle of the frame. And that black bar is there because her shutter speed was not on the right shutter speed when her flash went off. And so you get that as a defect. And having worked as a photographer in that time period myself, when I did that, and we all did that, sometimes I would just look at the negative and chuck it. She didn't.
Now, you said that your Yarkova did not share with you that she was in the LGBTQ community for quite some time after while you first knew her. And once she shared that, how did that come about? How does her being a member of the LGBT community impact her art?
Okay. So I think it came about because over a period of time, we got to know each other. And she began to be comfortable around us in a way that allowed her to take away that sort of that mask, that veneer of that I think an awful lot of people in the LGBT community live with when they aren't quite sure who they're dealing with and what those people's attitudes are. And it's this notion of trust. I mean, not only in terms of her relationship to my wife and myself, and then to Colin after he met her. But I think this notion of trust is so important, and when we look at this body of work, you don't just walk into a club like the Tea Club and start taking pictures. It just doesn't work, particularly in a society where, well, not illegal, but certainly not particularly comfortable or accepted, and in a society where some percentage of the people at the Tea Club were either secret members of the Secret Service agents or the Secret Police, or informants to the Secret Police. So you have to get trust. And when we look at these pictures, that trust comes out partly in the way she approached taking the pictures. Most of the pictures in here, all in this in the sanctuary, and most in the fireside room, were made with a single on-camera flash. And the reason for that decision was really sort of twofold. One, if this flash is going off in somebody's face, they know they're being photographed. There's no way to steal the image. And that was very important to her, to have this, in effect, buy-in with the people in the club. So that, that was quite important. The other goes back to analog photography. And the Tea Club, it was a very dark place. And it's very difficult to make pictures in there without adding a strobe. In those days, a film speed of 400 was fast. The digital camera I have has a film speed of 52,000. So you can work in a lot lower light situation without flash. So it was both a decision about gaining the trust and respect of the people she was photographing, as well as a practical solution to a technical problem.
Okay, as we begin to wrap up, I wanted to mention one that I think that a lot of what you're saying in terms of the way that her work is framed and the way she photographed talks about life, right? And how messy life is as well, right? For all of us. And I think that that's also a message from her work. How do you personally connect to her work? Why did you choose to bring this exhibit here?
Well, there are a couple reasons. I mean, first, I just think the work itself is really fresh, really original. I think when you look back at the time period, it was really breaking new ground in terms of photography. And I also think that, as was mentioned in the sermon this morning, we're at a particular time in the history of this country where this work resonates and is important to be seen. It's important to reinforce the idea that LGBTQ people have the same right to have a life as anybody else does, and that what Labouche is celebrating here is her life and the life of her community. And I think that's an important message.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us about her work or about your work?
I think two things about her work, or few things about her work very quickly. One is that on October 16th, there will be an artist talk where, while Labouche is unable to join us in person, it'll be a live webinar setup. And I hope you all can come to that. And then on the 22nd, there is going to be a panel discussion about her work, also here. So both of those things, and there is a major documentary film being worked on that is supposed to be released sometime in 2023, and we are hoping to be able to bring both the film and Labouche to Houston at that time.
Okay, and I do have one more question before you go. This question came up at the opening on Friday night. Is there any symbolism to the name Tea Club for the Tea Club?
So we asked Labouche about that, and her comment was that when I was making the pictures in the early 1980s, absolutely nobody had any idea why it was called the Tea Club. It was just the Tea Club. And 40 years later, I still have no idea why it was called the Tea Club. So maybe there's somebody out there somewhere who does, and maybe that person bizarrely is listening in on this live stream and will enlighten us.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. And now I'm going to ask, because we have another service starting in about 15 minutes, that everyone please exit the sanctuary and have a beautiful day.